Hi, I'm Moose, and unless you've got any radioactive spiders or super soldier serums lying around, the closest I'll ever get to living out my superhero dreams is through the comfort of a controller.
Is this more action than even Spider-Man can handle?
Superheroes are constantly evolving, and every game they star in is a snapshot of whatever comic storyline or blockbuster movie defined the current era. In our new series, we're going to explore the context of comic book computer games and see which ones are still worth your time. So hold on to your balloons, reset the computer, and welcome to Die, because now you're playing with powers. From the 2600 to the PlayStation 4, the web slinger has graced countless consoles and arcade cabinets, so let's get right into the swing of things with Part 1, 1982 to 1992. Spidey got his first video game in 1982, at the height of the Atari age. The Amazing Spider-Man on the Atari 2600 wasn't just the first Spider-Man game, it was the first Marvel game, period, kicking off a legacy that would lead directly to Insomniac's all-new adventure. Don't expect any quips or QTEs in this debut, however.
Help! Please! Someone! I'm going to die.
You slowly web-sling up a building, avoiding criminals, defusing bombs, and battling the Green Goblin, who you can't actually defeat. If you don't run out of fluid, you'll eventually reach the top, then start over on an identical building.
Holy Hannah, you're running out of fluid!
Still, the gameplay is fairly complex for the era, and the graphics are simple but recognizable. It doesn't appear to be based on any specific comic, since by 1982, Norman Osborn had been dead for almost a decade, his son Harry had given up the glider, and the Hobgoblin wouldn't debut for another year. It just goes to show that even after his iconic death, the Goblin was still considered Spider-Man's #1 nemesis. Remember, Venom hadn't been created yet, and it'd be pretty tough to animate Doc Ock's tentacles with 128 bytes of RAM. 2 years after the Atari game, Spider-Man appeared on early PCs. Scott Adams' Quest Probe was a 1984 series of text adventure games starring a variety of Marvel heroes, which mostly consisted of staring at still images as you typed instructions like go north and punch lizard into a frustrating text parser.
Stop the typing! Stop the typing! Stop the typing!
Several of Spidey's rogues show up to stand perfectly still as you type commands at them, as you race to collect a bunch of gems for Madam Web, who was still a new and extremely minor character in the comics at the time, well before the animated series made her seem way more important than she actually is. 2 more Spider-Man PC games were released in this era, a puzzle platformer on the Amiga where Spidey tracked Mysterio through movie-themed rooms, and Spider-Man and Captain America in Doctor Doom's Revenge. It was a simple 2D fighter with the story told through comic panels where Cap and Spidey battle through a mix of Z-list villains on their way to destroy Doctor Doom. And once you topple the Latverian tyrant, George H.W. Bush himself offers his personal congratulations.
Okily dokily, thankily dankily. Great delicious, scrub-diddlerific.
Despite the presidential endorsement, Spider-Man games didn't truly become mainstream until the 16-bit era. Spidey's first appearance on a 16-bit console wasn't actually in a Spider-Man game, it was in Revenge of Shinobi. Sega's Ninja side-scroller included all sorts of copyright-infringing characters as bosses, like Godzilla, the Terminator, Batman, and yes, Spider-Man. Subsequent releases eliminated the copycats, but since Sega had the Spidey license, he got to stay. Speaking of Sega, if you had a Genesis, you more than likely owned Spider-Man vs. the Kingpin. 2/3 of everyone who had the system bought this game, which was a surprisingly deep simulation of the life of Peter Parker. He could hang out in his apartment to restore his health, snap photos to pay for that expensive web fluid, and deal with a particularly cranky J. Jonah Jameson.
I'm Jameson. Who and what are you?
The plot involved the Kingpin unleashing a nuclear bomb on New York City.
What a night! All this talk about nuking the city's got this town crazier than usual. And that's saying a lot.
Yeah, sure, Sarge.
Forcing Spidey to run through a gauntlet of his deadliest foes, including Venom in his first video game appearance.
Don't count me out yet, Spider-Man!
In 1991, Sega followed up its success with a little-known arcade game simply called Spiderman, which was a side-scrolling beat-em-up in the vein of Konami's X-Men and Ninja Turtles series. But unlike those merry teams of mutant teens, Spidey has always been a loner, Dottie, a rebel. So Sega had to fill in some gaps to make the multiplayer action possible. Black Cat was an obvious choice for backup, and even if Hawkeye's kind of a stretch, I'm sure Clint wouldn't have a problem helping out a reserve Avenger.
What are you doing here?
Disappointing my kids. I'm supposed to go water skiing.
But the fourth slot makes no sense. When I think of the low-key, street-level superheroics of Spider-Man, the last character on my mind is the Submariner. Namor is too unhinged, too powerful, and too full of himself to pal around with a punk from Queens.
Hey, hiya, Prince. Going to the party?
I was under the impression the gathering was for super beings, not super freaks.
The arcade brawler has some interesting ideas for the era, like how the camera zooms out for wall-crawling platforming challenges, but it never achieved the success of games like The Simpsons or Sunset Riders. Back on home consoles, Spidey had started showing up on systems by Nintendo. In 1990, Spider-Man made his portable debut in a side-scroller on the OG Green Game Boy. It's a fairly typical game for the era. You walk to the right, punch bad guys, and fight a boss at the end of each level. But it's got a little more personality than most Game Boy games, with cool little cutscenes where Spidey and a supervillain talk shit to each other on walkie-talkies. It's little touches like that would eventually make developer Rare famous, and the music from future Donkey Kong Country composer David Wise is definitely a highlight. Sadly, Rare didn't work on the next two Game Boy games in the series, and the quality definitely declined with each one. Spidey's first and only NES outing came at the tail end of the system's lifespan, with The Return of the Sinister Six. It was based on the recent comic storyline of the same name and used Eric Larson's artwork for cutscenes and even the cover. The only exception was the ending screen, which was actually taken from Steve Ditko's first appearance of the Sinister Six. That's about as pretty as the game gets though. For something released in 1992, it pales in comparison to what other developers could achieve with the NES's outdated hardware. And compared to the then new Super Nintendo, the Sinister Six straight up sucked. Speaking of the SNES, the last game we're covering today debuted on the platform the same year before being ported over to the Genesis, Game Gear, and Game Boy. Spider-Man and the X-Men in Arcade's Revenge.
Tired of the same old fun and games? Welcome, Spider-Man X-Men, to the video game ride of your lives.
Wolverine, Spider-Man, Gambit, Cyclops.
Now on Genesis, the ultimate video game team.
It was a simpler time before billion-dollar corporations had divvied up the rights to every single comic book character, and Spidey could just team up with Marvel's misunderstood mutants without making any headlines. Arcade's Revenge was inspired by a comic that came out 20 years earlier, during the legendary Byrne Claremont run on the X-Men. The game updated the source material with the team's current costumes and members like Gambit, who didn't actually exist back then.
Everyone can relax. Gambit has returned.
It keeps the general concept of garbage trucks getting the jump on highly trained heroes and trapping them in Murder World, Arcade's self-proclaimed Disneyland of death. But beyond that, the game doesn't follow the story too closely, which means we never get to see Colossus get brainwashed into a Soviet spy called the Proletarian. After beating each hero's individual level, Spidey takes center stage for the climax, facing off against a massive Matryoshka doll as the final boss. Not that I ever got there personally, it was a really hard game, but it was nothing compared to the carnage that awaited Spidey as the 90s went on. Part 2, 1992 to 2002. The early 90s were a strange era for Spider-Man. James Cameron's efforts to make a big budget movie were dead in the water, see our video on that very subject for more info, and in the comics, flashier heroes like the X-Men were stealing the spotlight. Lucky for Marvel, less so for Peter Parker, the debut of Venom had injected some new blood into Spidey's rogues gallery.
You'll see us everywhere, even in your nightmares.
And in 1993, the two teamed up for their very own epic crossover, Maximum Carnage.
Carnage, eh? I like the sound of that.
Marvel rolled out all the stops for this second major appearance of their symbiotic slasher, with a sprawling 14-part storyline spread across the 5 different Spider-Man comics published at the time. And similar to what Star Wars would do with Shadows of the Empire a few years later, Marvel made Maximum Carnage a multimedia event. Its video game tie-in debuted on 16-bit systems with a massive advertising campaign, music by the alt-metal band Green Jelly, and special red cartridges that made them stand out on your shelf. But for all the hype, the game itself was only okay. It's a single-player brawler where you play as Spidey or Venom depending on the level, but for a beat-em-up, the enemy variety is really basic, and after destroying dozens of the same trenchcoat guys and ponytail girls, it gets a little repetitive. On the bright side, it's one of the first true adaptations of a comic book storyline. We've seen games use art inspired by panels before, but never to the extent of incorporating actual dialogue, plot, and crossover cameos from heroes like Cloak and Dagger or Firestar. There's even a post-credits stinger where you face off with Carnage in the final battle after the first fake-out ending. Maximum Carnage was a massive hit, so the next year, Acclaim rushed out a sequel called Separation Anxiety, named after the 1994 storyline of the same name. But the game has more in common with Venom's original Lethal Protector run, with the introduction of the Life Foundation and the 5 spin-off symbiotes. Not that you'd notice, because the comic cutscenes were replaced with text, and the recycled gameplay and sprites make it even more of a slog to get through, although the added co-op and ability to select between Venom and Spidey is appreciated. As the 90s comics bubble burst, 616 Spidey would be mired in the controversial Clone Saga for the next 2 years. But lucky for us webheads, 1994 also gave us one of the most awesome Spider-Man adaptations ever in the animated series. Hot on the heels of their smash X-Men show, Fox followed it up with the excellent Spider-Man. And while I'd rank it slightly below X-Men, for me at least, it was a gateway drug into the wonderful world of the web-slinger, although the video game it inspired didn't have nearly as much impact. Released for the SNES and Genesis, the animated series game was yet another 2D platformer, more simple and straightforward than the earlier Spider-Man vs. the Kingpin, but with lush graphics inspired by the colorful cartoon. It might not win any awards for innovation, but it definitely didn't lack in the villains department. It featured over a dozen of Spidey's rogues, including baddies like the Jack-o'-lantern and a Xenomorph who never actually appeared in the show. Unfortunately, the game was released in 1995, the same year the Sega Saturn and PlayStation came out in America, immediately making the old gen obsolete. The show itself would continue until 1998, but it only received that one adaptation, unless you count Spider-Man Cartoon Maker, and by all means we should. Independent of the animated series, we were treated to a couple more Spidey games as the 16-bit era wound down, like this Super Nintendo game called Lethal Foes, which featured incredible animations, super responsive controls, and the first video game appearance of Speedball. Unfortunately, US fans of superheroes named after deadly drug cocktails would have to wait, since Lethal Foes was only released in Japan. Lastly, we've got Web of Fire, and with its pre-rendered Donkey Kong Country-style graphics and animated backgrounds, it's an interesting feast for the eyes. Unfortunately, it was released for Sega's 32X add-on after the company announced it was discontinuing support of the ill-advised accessory.
Thank you.
And today, the few copies that did sell are worth hundreds of dollars in the collector's market. Now, before we move on, I have to mention 1995's the first entry in Capcom's long-running crossover series that featured Spidey and his iconic sprite that would be reused all the way until Marvel vs. Capcom 2. But as for standalone Spider-Man games, we're about to enter a 4-year dry spell. The animated series was canceled, lawyers were battling over Spidey's movie rights, and, oh yeah, Marvel went bankrupt. But once the dust settled, the new millennium gave birth to one of my favorite games of the era, simply titled Spider-Man. Developer Neversoft was best known for their legendary Tony Hawk's Pro Skater series, which featured Spider-Man as an unlockable skater in the second installment. That's not a coincidence, because their 2000 Spider-Man game came out the same year and runs on the same engine. Freed from the bounds of the second dimension, the polygonal Peter Parker faces a gauntlet of his most fearsome foes, culminating in a climactic battle against Dr. Octopus, who's been merged with the Carnage symbiote. It's an impressive effort for Spidey's first 3D outing, but Neversoft couldn't quite land the combo. In outdoor sections, you're not allowed to touch the ground thanks to some toxic gas that conveniently covers up the low draw distance. Also, as you swing through the sky, your webs don't actually attach to anything unless there are hundreds of conveniently placed helicopters hovering just above the skybox.
These guys are serious.
Meanwhile, the cramped indoor environments and obtuse camera made combat a bit of a pain, but I'm willing to forgive any gameplay foibles because the fan service is second to none. NeverSoft's Spider-Man isn't based on an animated series, the then in development Sam Raimi movie, or any particular run from the comics. Instead, it's just a gushing love letter to the character, his supporting cast, and the entire Marvel Universe. I mean, right from Jump Street, Smilin' Stan Lee himself narrates the whole game.
Welcome, true believers and newcomers alike. Spider-Man co-creator Stan Lee here.
Which is full of hidden comics,
golden,
a cavalcade of cameos ranging from Captain America to the Punisher.
Something tells me we have the same objective here.
And even a wacky what-if mode based on Marvel's long-running alternate universe series.
You already know the outcome of Spider-Man's battle with Dr. Octopus, Carnage, and the symbiotes. But what if? What if this time, in this time stream, some of the events unfolded differently?
But my favorite aspect of NeverSoft's Spider-Man has to be the bonus costumes. As you played the game, or entered the cheat code True Believer, you'd unlock extra outfits that harken back to some deep cuts in Spidey history, like Miguel O'Hara's suit from Spider-Man 2099, the Cosmic Captain Universe costume, and of course, the bombastic Bagman, a spare Fantastic Four uniform from when Reed first separated Spidey from the symbiote. Remember, this was well before Wikipedia, and these costumes helped introduce me to all sorts of Spidey lore I had no idea existed, kickstarting an obsession that led to me writing this very video. Also worth noting, these costumes were all absolutely free bonus content, but today, you just know they would be paid DLC. The NeverSoft game started on the PlayStation and was ported to most 5th-gen platforms, and spawned a few sequels for the Game Boy's Color and Advance, as well as a 32-bit follow-up the next year. Spider-Man Enter Electro was basically more of the same, although this time around, you could at least bring Spidey down to street level. I will also give it props for this commercial that gave us a way more convincing Max Dillon than Jamie Foxx ever did. But the most interesting fact about Enter Electro is how it changed as a result of the real-life tragedy of 9/11. The game was set to release on September 18th, 2001, and it originally featured a final boss fight where you battled Electro across the Twin Towers.
Where would you go to be on top of the world? I'm coming, Electro. Your power play ends tonight.
But just like Metal Gear Solid 2 and GTA 3, the game was delayed and heavily reworked to avoid referencing the World Trade Center. Games weren't the only Spidey media impacted by the attacks, however. Sony also had to recall their upcoming movie's infamous teaser trailer where Spidey catches a helicopter on a web between the towers. Still, Sam Raimi's Spider-Man went on to smash box office records, solidify a new era of comic book movie dominance, and pave the way for the game that set the superhero standard. Part 3, The Movie Games, 2002 to 2008. Sam Raimi's Spider-Man perfectly captured Peter Parker's plight, the conflict at the heart of his character, and the corniness that makes Spider-Man so endearing. I would like to see him crack a few more jokes, but considering this was 2002, I was just thankful Spidey wasn't swinging around in a black leather jumpsuit. The movie shattered box office records, and outside of the theaters, Spider fans were showered with a huge wave of movie tie-ins. And while I'd love to do a whole video just about those toy web shooters, we're here to talk about games. Specifically, Spider-Man, the movie, the game. Spider-Man the movie was built off the bones of the 2000 NeverSoft title, and the core gameplay loop is extremely similar. You alternate between web-slinging sky chases and awkward interior levels with frustrating stealth sections and a crappy camera. The 6th-gen graphics are technically a step up, but they're a little dull compared to the comic book colors of the 2000 game, and the unenthusiastic voice acting from the movie's stars doesn't help.
I should be able to get back out the same way I got in, and only a couple zillion heavily armed androids between me and it. No prob.
Tobey Maguire was never the most dynamic Spider-Man, but he sounds like he's on Valium throughout this whole game.
Scorpion? Disappeared.
I feel bad for him, but I can't help hoping.
Willem Dafoe does a decent job.
Meeting you today is an unexpected bonus.
But Kirsten Dunst and James Franco didn't even bother to show up, and neither did the Macho Man Randy Savage, yeah! The only standout is Raimi mainstay, Bruce Campbell, who steals the show as the smarmy narrator in all 3 movie adaptations.
Well, I'm gonna let you in on a little secret. If you press the left trigger while crawling on a wall, you'll web zip in the direction you're crawling. Huh? Who's your daddy?
The game itself is nothing to write home about, but it's always interesting to see movie universe versions of characters that never made it to the screen. Long before Homecoming, we got to battle the Shocker, the Vulture, Scorpion, and if you had an Xbox, Kraven the Hunter. There was also a cool bonus mode where you could replay the game from the POV of Harry Osborn as a good guy Green Goblin, and unlockable skins based on Alex Ross's unused concept art. It was decent for the time, but today the game has largely been forgotten thanks to the shining success of Spider-Man 2. Raimi's filmic follow-up improves on its predecessor in nearly every way, unless you prefer Chad Kroeger and Josie Scott to Dashboard Confessional. For me, it's Dashboard, hands down. And similarly, developer Treyarch's second Spider-Man game blew the first out of the water. 3 years after GTA 3 ignited the open world revolution, Spider-Man 2 introduced superpowers to the wide-open sandbox. Instead of individual levels, the game gave you a massive map of New York City to explore with the all-new web-slinging engine created by Jamie Fristrom. In earlier games, you just sort of shot webs up into the sky. They never attached to anything or affected the way you swung. You might as well just be flying. But for Spidey 2, Fristrom developed a system that shot a sphere of invisible lines out of Spider-Man every time he fired a web. The rays scanned all the physical objects in the environment around them, kind of like how a bat uses echolocation, and then selected the optimal point for the most cinematic swing. Top that off with an awesome arsenal of moves and in-air tricks, especially the classic web catapult, and you have a game that's an utter joy to navigate, with inertia, physics, and raw speed that gives a real sense of urgency to moving across the city, even if you're just delivering a pizza. Unfortunately, the rest of the game hasn't aged as well as the web slinging.
Well...
The open world feels pretty empty compared to the heavily populated sandboxes of the modern age, and it forced you to complete repetitive side quests in order to rack up the hero points you need to continue the story, most of which boiled down to chasing a car, beating up bad guys, chasing a car and then beating up bad guys, or rescuing balloons for hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds of crying children. Speaking of the story, it sticks fairly close to the plot of the film, but we do get a few more non-movie cameos like Black Cat, Rhino, and my favorite, a subplot involving Mysterio, who engineers an alien invasion of the Statue of Liberty and gets taken out with one punch despite his hilariously long life bar.
I will destroy you utterly. You will bear witness to the majesty and glory of my power. You have trifled with my...
Whoa, that was sick, dude.
For all the game's faults, Spider-Man 2's web swinging has never been matched, not even by the spiritual sequel Energy Hook made by Fristrom himself. Future Spidey games would simplify the mechanics since its complexity could be a barrier to just pressing start and immediately feeling like the ultimate Spider-Man. Released a year after Spidey 2, The Ultimate Spider-Man was an interesting experiment in adaptation. Instead of being based on a comic book storyline, the game tried to add to the canon of the alternate universe Ultimate series.
This is how it all began. Which, of course, leads to nonsense like this.
It opens up with an awesome flashback reliving Peter's football field battle against Venom, who you later get to control with a moveset that lets you fling cars and eat innocent people to recharge your power. And if Venom's not evil enough for you, you can even play as the Green Goblin himself in Battle for New York, a sequel to the DS version of the game. Back on consoles, when you're in Spidey's shoes, you web around the city in a simplified take on Spider-Man 2, but it's dragged down by this baffling mechanic that makes you climb the web mid-swing to gain height. Still, the cel-shaded graphics are a stylistic improvement over Spidey 2, the gameplay is solid enough, and the story oozes with love for the Ultimate Universe.
You don't say.
Ultimate Spidey creators Brian Michael Bendis and Mark Bagley were heavily involved in the production, and the game was intended to be a canonical entry in their legendary run, taking place somewhere between issues 71 and 72, and explaining how Eddie Brock gained control over the Venom suit and incorporated that cool white logo.
Stuff that we're doing in this is going to be carried on. He's going to be making sure that stuff that's happening in the comics are at least tangentially related to what's going on in the game.
Unfortunately, the realities of monthly comic book production meant that the story had evolved beyond compatibility with the game, and future issues would ignore developments like Silver Sable's knowledge of Spidey's secret identity and Peter Parker's transformation into Carnage.
You, Parker!
The plot was very loosely adapted as the War of the Symbiotes storyline 2 years later, leaving the Ultimate Spider-Man game as an intriguing but ultimately failed experiment. Speaking of failures, let's talk about Spider-Man 3. Well, first I should mention Spidey's appearance in Marvel Ultimate Alliance, although we'll probably save that for an Avengers series down the road. This video is already pretty packed, and when it comes to Spider-Man 3, there's nowhere near enough time to air all my grievances about this movie here. Let's just say I had way less of a problem with Scene Kid Peter dancing than I did with the Sandman killing Uncle Ben.
What are you doing?
Instead, I'm just gonna hate on the game, although there's really not a whole lot to say about it. I bought it for my 360, thinking it would be a stunning next-gen successor to Spider-Man 2, but the game disappointed me almost as much as the movie. Superficially, it's similar to the previous entry with the same wide-open world and web-slinging, but bugs and glitches turned the silky smooth aerial acrobatics of 2 into a janky, awkward mess. The mission variety is a little better, especially with the new symbiote suit, but the story is just as lame as the movie, even with the addition of Rhino, the Kingpin, and the Lizard paying off the setup that the movies never would.
Parker, you got something to add?
Oh, sir.
This was also the first Spider-Man game to incorporate QuickTime events, because nothing makes you feel more powerful than pressing a button and watching the game play itself.
Could he have survived that fall? Well, I'm done here either way.
There were actually 3 different versions of this game, the main one for 7th gen consoles, a 2D portable game, and a downgraded port with different gameplay for PS2 and some obligatory waggle controls thrown in for the Wii.
Yeehaw! Get along, little doggy.
But honestly, you'd be better off playing Spider-Man Friend or Foe instead of any of these. It's a stylized, kid-friendly take on the movieverse with colorful graphics, awesome co-op, and appearances from heroes like Blade and Iron Fist in a globe-trotting adventure that's a nice change of pace from New York. Aesthetically, it almost feels like Kingdom Hearts set in the Raimi-verse, and it was a breath of fresh air compared to the slog that was Spidey 3. After the lackluster reception to the movie, Raimi was burnt out, and Sony canceled his Spider-Man 4 in favor of a short-lived reboot. The Mark Webb movies got a couple games too, but not before we got our first glimpse into a much larger Spider-Verse. Part 4, 2008 to 2018. But before we get into any alternate dimensions, we've got to talk about a AAA Spidey game that almost went under the radar, Spider-Man Web of Shadows. Spider-Man games have always been a product of their times. The 80s and 90s were rife with brawlers and 2D platformers, the 2000s embraced the open world, and by 2008, the new hotness was moral choice systems.
Say goodnight, Manuel.
You cannot silence the truth. My voice must be heard.
That might have been a little extreme, Commander.
BioShock and Mass Effect had just come out the year before, offering players the opportunity to pick whether they'd be a moral paragon or a little sister slaughtering renegade. Developers everywhere started cramming morality systems into their games, and Spider-Man was no exception. Web of Shadows uses the symbiote suit to let Spider-Man embrace his dark side, with different moves and plot developments depending on what costume you use in combat and how nasty you want to be. Like in most games of the era, your choices aren't quite as impactful as the marketing made it seem. There are only 7 major decisions to make, like whether you give in to the Black Cat's advances or decide to rip symbiote Wolverine in half.
I'll kill you for this.
Wolverine is safe. Get back here and pick him up.
Your choices and actions in the wide open world lead to one of 4 possible endings, including one where MJ breaks up with Peter, which is harsh, but not as bad as when she straight up died in the bad ending to Spidey vs. the Kingpin.
Mary Jane!
Web of Shadows is no slouch as far as Spidey games go. Even its DS port is a solid take on a web-slinging Metroidvania. But it exists in a weird space in the Spidey canon. Memories of the Raimi trilogy were still fresh, and salt still lingered from the poor reception to Spider-Man 3. It may have been too soon for an all-new take on the character, but just 2 years later, fans were ready to embrace 4 in Spider-Man Shattered Dimensions. Spidey is one of the most versatile characters in all of comics, and he's been translated into dozens of Elseworlds and alternate realities, from 1602 to the spectacular Spider-Ham.
Is that a cartoon pig? Focus!
Shattered Dimensions was an attempt to unite 4 very different takes on the character as they assist Madam Web in her quest to unite the cosmic MacGuffins known as the Tablets of Order and Chaos. Gameplay-wise, it strays from the wide-open structure of its predecessors in favor of a linear, dimension-hopping adventure. Each Spider-Man has their own unique look and combat style. The mainstream Amazing Spidey lives in a colorful comic book world, using his arsenal of web-based weapons to control crowds. Ultimate Spidey is ensconced in the symbiote suit, giving him God of War-esque brawling abilities in a cel-shaded style. Spider-Man 2099 was focused on speeding through a bright neon future, and Noir's stealthy sections have a realistic tone and filmic filters that made it resemble the Batman Arkham series. It's an awesome tribute to Spidey history, especially when you consider that each version is voiced by someone who's played Peter Parker in the past. Amazing is voiced by Neil Patrick Harris from the 2003 MTV show. Noir is played by Christopher Daniel Barnes of the 90s animated series. Miguel O'Hara is Dan Gilvezan from Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends. And Josh Keaton from The Spectacular Spider-Man plays Ultimate Spidey.
Gentlemen.
I really hate this fella.
Come on, he's a blast to kick in the face.
Pal, you got shot!
The universes aren't exactly like their comic counterparts, but it's an awesome tribute to some interesting iterations of Spider-Man, courtesy of writer Dan Slott, who was inspired by his work on Shattered Dimensions when he created the 2014 Spider-Verse comics event, which paved the way for the amazing-looking animated feature.
How many more Spider people are there?
Same as the Comic-Con.
What's Comic-Con?
Let's go!
The game was followed up by Spider-Man Edge of Time, which played similarly but half the number of available Spider-Men, with only Amazing and 2099 making the cut for the time-traveling sequel. It's still a solid game, but a lot of it feels rehashed from Shattered Dimensions. And speaking of rehashes, we finally come to the Amazing Spider-Man. As far as the Mark Webb movies go, I will just be kind and say they were a mixed bag. Andrew Garfield was definitely a more energetic Spidey. He and Emma Stone were a way better couple than Kirsten and Toby, and hell yeah, mechanical web shooters. But overall, the movies just feel like joyless, cynical cash-ins churned out by Sony in a desperate attempt to force their own cinematic universe. If you like them, hey, more power to you, but me, I'd rather play the games. The first Amazing Spider-Man game returned to the open-world exploration of Spider-Man 2, and took inspiration from the Arkham series with its rhythmic, counter-based brawls, but sadly, it regressed to some PS1-era web-swinging mechanics. Once more, you automatically shoot webs into the sky where they stick to God knows what. Although the addition of the Web Rush mode was a cool compromise that let you plot a stylish path across the city, even when you're playing as Stan Lee.
Progress, over.
Excelsior!
The story, such as it is actually a sequel to the movie where Spidey and the Lizard team up to stop Alistair Smythe and his Spider Slayers. Other non-movie appearances include Vermin, the Scorpion, and a mutated Rhino, who would be immediately retconned as Paul Giamatti in a mech suit in the next movie.
I am Rhino! I told you I would be back!
The Amazing Spider-Man 2 also inspired a game, although this one has even less to do with the film. Electro is barely in it. Instead, Spidey has his hands full dealing with Kraven, Kingpin, and Carnage. I do appreciate it ties up the loose end of Uncle Ben's killer.
Horrible. But at least it's finally over. The man who took Ben from us won't ever hurt anyone again.
Might have been nice to see that in the movie itself, but hey. And the web swinging makes a little more sense compared to the first game, with each shoulder trigger controlling a separate web shooter. This was also Spidey's first major appearance on the PS4 and Xbox One, unless you count the LEGO games. But Amazing 2 was developed with the older systems in mind, so they were limited and couldn't quite go ham with the graphics.
We just finished level 3 and need to tighten up the graphics a little bit.
Great.
And my mom said I would never get anywhere with these games.
This was the last Spider-Man game before Activision lost the license in 2014, which, by the way, is the reason so many of the games we covered in this series are no longer available for purchase. For a little while, there was simply more money in mobile games. Big movie studios eventually realized that it didn't make much sense to spend millions of dollars making a AAA game when they could just slap their IP over a bejeweled clone and rake in way more dough. There have been Spidey games on cell phones going back to 2003, and more recently he's appeared in Contest of Champions, Avengers Academy, and about a million other Marvel mobile games with microtransactions out the wazoo. There are some deserving of a shout out like Total Mayhem, a legit third-person action game, and Spider-Man Unlimited. Not to be confused with the extremely bizarre follow-up to the 90s animated series, Unlimited is a Temple Run style endless runner with boss fights, tons of bonus costumes, and an energy system that makes you pay if you want to play it without waiting. For a while, this looked like the future of superhero gaming, but in 2016, Sony announced an all-new AAA title simply called Spider-Man. And now that we've gotten a chance to take it for a spin, Insomniac might have delivered the Spidey game of my dreams. The web swinging is easy to learn but hard to master, with an array of tricks, flips, and zips to build speed across the sky, like a death-defying dive and an Arkham-style grapple boost. There are a lot of traversal tools at your disposal, but the swinging is also designed in a way where you can kinda just hold down R2 and get where you need to go. It's as complex as you want it to be, just like the combat. Between the launches, juggles, combos, and counters, Spidey has never had this many options for taking down his foes, and that's not even counting all of the new moves, web gadgets, and suit powers you unlock throughout the game. It's not quite as brutal and satisfying as Arkham's combat, but its emphasis on aerial fighting sets Spidey apart from his caped and cowled counterpart. The open world has introduced modern AAA tropes like towers, collectibles, and an endless array of side quests, but they feel fresh and new inside the universe Insomniac has created. From wheat cakes to pro wrestling, their world is bursting with the familiar and the new, with tons of hardcore Spidey lore mixed in with intriguing new takes on classic characters that I guarantee will surprise you. The new Spider-Man has taken lessons from all the games that came before and incorporated them into a gorgeous new adventure oozing with polish and pride. Our friendly neighborhood hero has appeared in over 30 games since he first swung from a pixelated web in 1982. Many have been spectacular, some were amazing, and a few were straight up awful. But at this point, Spider-Man is as much of a video game character as Link or Solid Snake. It's a testament to his enduring popularity and how his powers and personality translate perfectly to the medium. Thanks for watching, everybody, and thank you for sticking with us through our 4-part history of Spider-Man games. Now that we're done, I want to know, who should we cover next? We can do Batman, Superman, the Avengers, the Tick, the Ninja Turtles. Leave a comment, let me know, and as always, please subscribe to NowThis Nerd.